Thanks everyone for joining us. Over the past year, the leadership at AgSafe reached out to me about cyber needs for AgSafe members. So we put together a series of webinars. If you had a chance to see those, one with an FBI special investigator talking about the landscape of international bad actors specifically targeting agricultural groups. One with a financial motivation, but also general mayhem of disrupting the food supply in the United States. We also had a security webinar with Joe Foose from ZAG to talk about the software and practices to prevent cyber breaches. When we look at the panel we have here today, this is essentially you've done everything right, all the preventative steps, and it still goes wrong. So the risk mitigation plan, breach management is this team here, the people that you want to talk to preventatively, but also having on your team when things go wrong. I like to, so I'm a climber recreationally, so I like mountaineering analogies, and I think it goes well with the ecosystem of how all the pieces fit together in the cyberspace. So thinking of that FBI presentation as more the landscape and the climate. So things you know about the altitude and the weather, and just facts that you can put away to educate yourself. The second piece of it in the security side is all the things that you expect to happen. With the weather, you're going to have the right layers, the right gear. You need some knowledge. In the breach portion, these are the things that you hope will never happen, but you're going to prepare anyway. The insurance policy is the avalanche beacon for when that risk occurs, and we want to know what it does, how it works, and we also know that once you've pulled that out of your jacket, the story's not over. There's still the response, the rescue, and so we'll think about that throughout the panel today. With that, I'd like each of the panelists to introduce themselves, kind of your practice specifically, and kind of a brief description of that. So Jennifer, I'll start with you.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. I'm Jennifer Wilson. I am the cyber practice leader for Newfront. My role is to oversee the placement, negotiation, and placement of insurance policies, and then oversee the claims, cyber risk and breach response claims for our clients. I've been with Newfront for coming up on a year, and I've been in the industry for about 25 plus years, focusing solely on cyber risk.
Hi, I'm Carolyn Ryan. I'm here from a law firm of Mullen Coughlin. I'm a lawyer, but don't run. But really, that's all that we do at Mullen Coughlin is cyber and data privacy. So we do everything from proactive pre-incident type of work, tabletop exercises like mock exercises, compliance type of work, all the way through that emergency lever of incident response. So when something actually bad goes wrong, and then we have a whole litigation department dealing with the regulators and everything else that is becoming nightmarish. So really happy and always want this to be, if you guys have any questions at any point, feel free to interrupt us and join it. That's what we're here for. I'm all about the questions. And if anybody needs anything at any point, just let us know, and I'll turn it right over to Greg.
All right, thank you. I'm Greg Gatsky. I'm with ZAG Technical Services. We're an IT services company that works predominantly in agriculture, mainly Salinas and Western U.S. And we help prepare for, defend against, and recover if there is an attack. So that's kind of our role.
Great. Thank you all. So Carolyn, I know in your practice, you're seeing the successful and significant breaches in the aftermath of that. So I think that's a great place to start on what you're seeing relative to growers and distributors in the ag industry and the types of incidents that you're seeing.
Sure, absolutely. So, and by the way, so I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about what we're seeing across the board, and this is all industries because the companies that I work with are everything from small, very small, like farm industries, all the way to some of the very large ones that are out there as well, and throughout all the companies. So, top things that we're seeing are, number one would be business email compromise. So those wonderful phishing emails that you get day in and day out. How many did you guys get this morning? Anybody get any this morning? All right, love to see it. That's the kind of start to a day that we love to hear. Number two, really there, and that actually goes right next to business email compromise, that unauthorized access to an email, would be wire transfer fraud. We're seeing this is exploding this year. I do have statistics that I can share. I don't know if we'll be able to see them over there, but if you are interested in seeing them, I'm happy to share them with you guys. It is ones that it is probably the highest that I've ever seen in my career. We're seeing very sophisticated attacks associated with them. It's no longer that broken English or that email where you can't really, that you can tell it's from someone else that really doesn't speak very well. It is probably the most sophisticated we've seen. And some of the attachments associated with it, like especially during COVID, we were seeing a lot of those attachments that said, it looked like it was from an HR department and said, hey, look, open this, it's your, whatever you're gonna fill out from HR for COVID purposes, and then it would lead to malware that was attached to it. But that wire transfer fraud is something that we're seeing. We're gonna talk about that in a little bit, because that's certainly something that I think, from an industry perspective, is one of the things that I would want to bring to the top of your radar. Next thing is the one that gets the news going, right, is ransomware. We're seeing not only just the most aggressive threat actors that are out there, we're probably monitoring about 120 different threat actors, but it's no longer the break into your systems, lock you out, extort you for cash. It's lock you out, sometimes not even bothering encrypting your systems, or just stealing your data, but really they are extorting you for cash, but they are now doing what I love to call the harassment play, where they are harassing not only just yourselves, it is text messages, phone calls, emails to everyone within your company. I had one the other day where they manipulated and put a malware within the system where it was literally calling everybody every 5 minutes, so everybody at the entire company was getting phone calls every 5 minutes. It was really great. Talk about irritating. But they're also doing a big social media pull. So there are ones where anything that you don't have locked down and stored, they are going to come after. But the real one, in addition to the business email compromise, the top one for the agricultural industry, manufacturing, would be supply chain issues. We're seeing a lot of third-party incidences. The past year alone has seen about an increase of about 15 to 20% from the previous year. And one of the things that we'll talk about here today is think about in your mind who, not only just you need to think about yourselves, but also the other companies that you do business with day in and day out. That's the kind of stuff we're thinking about. What's your vulnerability? Because you could be worried about yourself, but you also need to be worried about your business and who you rely upon to get your business out the door. So I'm going to turn that. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
You mentioned vulnerability, which kind of leads into where are you seeing the root causes?
Yeah.
Is it actually structural problems, or is it soft things like people and mistakes made?
Yeah. Greg, I'm sure you can speak to this as well, but the top ones we're seeing are those wonderful phishing emails. People are clicking on them, especially, do you guys have a lot of remote workers? People are working either out, working remotely, a lot of them. The problem, what we're seeing a lot of it is, oh wait, I got an email, I must have gotten logged out, right? And, and they see what looks like to be a Windows sign-in box, and then people re-enter in their credentials thinking they got logged out. But these websites that they were being directed to look exactly like the login, right? So you're going back to square one. It used to be, oh, if I have multi-factor authentication, that secondary login, we're good, right? No longer. We're seeing a lot of people where they're getting around those issues, where you get that secondary text message chain. Well, I'm sure Craig could talk about what's called SIM swapping. What they're doing is they're taking your cell phone number and getting around those multi-factor authentications now. I had one the other day where somebody got sent a QR code. If you go to a restaurant now, you can't get away without seeing a QR code, which I don't know if my vision's starting to go, but I don't like the QR codes very much anymore. I don't trust anything. But it was an email that had a QR code that was in it that led somebody to a secondary site, which led to a ransomware incident. But business email compromise, a lot of them, we can talk about the phishing emails is the largest one that's out there. We're seeing a lot of open ports, so go back, ask your IT people, is everything open to the internet? It's like leaving your front door of your house open. Please don't. right? Please don't do that, right? These are the kinds of things that are practical tips. The other thing would be, once an employee leaves, take away their credentials, please. Because that's another one that we're seeing, a very big one of like the method of intrusion is you're utilizing old credentials or stolen credentials, things along the lines of that nature. And software updates. Those are the top ones, where people are just not updating quickly enough, and it's, again, leaving a door open.
So in the agriculture space, I know the insurance needs and structural requirements are unique. Jennifer, could you talk a bit about that and the points that our AgSafe members need to consider when they're structuring their insurance resources?
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to pivot a little bit because there's so much that Carolyn said that matches kind of what our process is. So I want to just pick up where Carolyn left off with the open ports before we get into the insurance and talk about our process as the insurance broker. Our process is to help you guys get the best risk profile possible before we even go to market for you. So one of the things that we'll do is run a risk scan, an external risk scan on your public-facing network and applications, and identify any software vulnerabilities, any open ports, any endpoint issues, and we'll give that to your IT group. They will address it. You can get that buttoned up before we even submit you to the marketplace, because the underwriters are pulling that same scan before they even look at you. So we want to get you in the best position first before we submit you to market. And be aware that the threat actors are running that same scan that we run. They're running that to identify open ports, areas that they can exploit. So it's really important, if your IT group is not running that, ask your broker to run it for you. Carriers are doing it midterm now, trying to find any vulnerabilities and asking you to address it. So just be aware that that's something you should be aware of. And then talking about the insurance, now pivoting over to the insurance, you'll find that there are a lot of imposters in the cyber insurance space. A lot of insurance companies like to throw the word cyber out there, but it might not necessarily provide you with the coverage that you think you need. For example, a cyber risk policy should have both first-party coverage, and that would be your ransomware, your privacy counsel, your IT forensics, IT restoration, business interruption. That's a big one for you guys. You want to make sure that you've got the first-party coverages as well as the third-party coverages, and that's going to be the third-party litigation against you for failing to protect, PII of a customer or employee. A lot of companies will provide you with cyber liability. That cyber liability policy, so I would just urge you to go back to your office and pull your policy and see, do you have just cyber liability? If so, you don't have any of those first-party coverages, the extortion payment and all the rest that I threw out there. You want to get those. Another coverage that you want to be aware of is dependent business interruption. And Carolyn talked about supply chain. You want to be aware that you should have all of these robust coverages on your policy, because a single ransomware event could trigger all of these coverages. So dependent business interruption, that could be a huge loss to you. The average downtime following a ransomware event is 25 days. So think about what 25 days down would look like for you, and make sure you've got that adequate coverage in place. And then Carolyn talked about the wire fraud being, one of the most common, frequent, and severe types of claims that we're seeing. We're seeing the same thing. You want to make sure that in addition to your robust cyber policy, you're also throwing in there cyber crime coverage. We won't place a cyber policy on behalf of a client without throwing in the cyber crime, and that's going to be your funds transfer fraud, the wire fraud types of claims, invoice manipulation. Those are some of the most common business email compromise claims that our clients are seeing, and Carolyn's saying the same thing. So you want to make sure you've got all of that. And then in addition, once you get your policy in place, you want to make sure you've got the right limits as well. And part of our external risk scan, part of that process is also helping you understand what your exposure is and making sure that you have adequate limits. If any of you out there have a 1 million limit policy right now, you want to change that, because $1 million in cyber coverage is not nearly enough to sustain even a single ransomware event with all costs included. Right now, we're still in a competitive market, slightly competitive. We're headed toward a hardening of the market, but right now we're still in a somewhat competitive market. You want to get options for at least $3 million in limits to help you sustain those type of events, and be aware that we're seeing double and triple extortion with our clients. Carolyn talked about the aggressive tactics. Part of that is double and triple extortion. We're seeing one of the events that we just recently saw. One of our clients got hit with a ransomware event. As they were thinking about whether or not they wanted to pay the ransom demand, those threat actors were calling their customers and telling them, we have your PII. Tell this company to pay the ransom or we're going to sell your confidential information to third parties. That's how aggressive they're getting. So get as much limit as you can afford is what I would recommend. And I'll turn it over to you, Justin.
Awesome. And Greg, so hearing kind of some of the insights they had on sources of breaches, in your space, where are you seeing some unique causes in addition to what you shared?
Yeah, thank you. So can I first ask, who's here is in HR? Anybody? Yep. Okay, so what they're referencing with PI is personal identifiable information, social security numbers, stuff like that. We find that is always on servers and but the files are there. We had one customer who downloaded all the employees because they wanted to get their birth dates to make sure they were sent on credit cards, stuff like that. And they had social security numbers there, right? So when the criminals get that causes a reporting requirement, which leads to class action, stuff like that. So number one, get that off, right? But what you need to do when preparing for something like this is, number one, make sure that you don't have to pay, right? Make sure you can recover. So 25 days is horrible, right? You know, lettuce doesn't last 25 days, right? You're gonna end up selling something to or having your competitors take over for you, so that you can still service your customers. We target 24 hours. And I believe that you should put on your IT the ability to recover in 24 hours. That's really hard. And that doesn't mean complete recovery, but that means being able to have your ERP system up and being able to produce, pay your employees, do whatever you need. Then you look at various ways. So that recovery is number one, because if you can't do that, you're going to end up paying, and there's no guarantee they're going to give you the keys, so you may lose doubly. Number two, like I said, make sure that you're not leading your company down into a class action, because you'll spend more time with lawyers, no offense, than you ever will.
I wouldn't want to deal with me either.
and it's not the cheapest meetings that you'll be in, right? Number three, there are many steps that need to happen. And part of the value that a company like mine brings is an internal IT person is just fighting day to day, keeping printing working, keeping users happy. They're not able to see all the different avenues that stuff comes in and what needs to be done. My strong recommendation is find a partner who's out there in the world and seeing all the different hits that are happening. And so all of those things. And the way the criminals are coming in, they're just coming in everywhere. And so when she talks about ACH fraud, which is, trying to get me to, instead of paying my bank or your bank, pay the criminal's bank, they could do that through attacking the customer or the vendor. So therefore, you may not have done anything wrong. But that's where you have to have policies in place that are enforced, where you pick up the phone and you call a known number, not the number on the email that's saying my bank changed. But you have to do that. You have to do that every time. And if you don't, in Salinas, we've seen customers lose between $40,000 and $200,000 just in what we personally have been engaged with through ACH fraud. And no one talks about that one because it's kind of embarrassing because, oh, I didn't call. Well, don't be embarrassed. We have to burst that embarrassment.
Well, and especially in this space where you guys are probably dealing with vendors that you might not deal with on a regular basis, or that you do deal with on a regular basis, and then you think, they must have had to change their bank account. But when was the last time you changed your bank account? I mean, I've had the same one since I was 16 years old. So think about it that way. I absolutely agree, right? I mean, you shouldn't have to, but if you ever get an email that says, hey, look, let's change the way that we have done a business transaction day in and day out, all of a sudden changing it for years, pick up the phone, and I agree. Call the number on the website. Do not call the number on the email. Threat actors.
And before we jump off of that topic, another component of this is your insurance policy. A lot of carriers are throwing in language in the policies. They call it the callback requirement. So insurance companies are sick of paying these claims, and they're sick of everybody falling for it, but everybody is falling for this wire fraud type of claim. So the insurance companies are saying exactly what Greg just said. They're saying you have to have a callback process in place, whereby when you receive a wire transfer email, you are calling your contact through your personal contacts, not through the email, as Greg just said, or calling it from the website, not calling the number that's in the email with the wire transfer information. And if you don't follow that procedure, that coverage will not apply. You will not be able to tap that coverage. So if you don't follow that procedure, no coverage for you. And these are one of the most common, frequent types of claims.
We had, and another thing I'll say is you've got to communicate within the company. So we had one customer, the CFO received an email that was a criminal email, and she looked at it and said, no, this isn't right, and so she deleted it. Well, the controller also received it, and he wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed or whatever, and $100,000 later, they lost that. If the CFO, if she had said, hey, I've got this, and kind of share that would help, right? I really like that you reference a requirement that insurance companies are putting on companies. I always like the analogy, back in the 1800s, factories were burning down because generators were being just built for the first time. And the insurance companies got together and did underwriter laboratories and kind of standardized electricity and all that stuff. They made the workplace better. I believe today our companies are burning down because of cyber, and the insurance is going to lead this to help us again. So lean into those requirements. Don't take them as a checkbox that you have to do and you get upset about it. Lean into it because every one of them is there for a reason.
Well, and just to add to that, only because, so what do you do if it did go out the door, right? Don't wait is the first thing that I will tell you. So if you have insurance, what they'll do is they'll connect you to either someone like myself, like yourself, Greg. So I will tell you, last night somebody did call me when I was out here, and they actually had a wire go out the door last Thursday, right? The first 24 to 48 hours are the most critical when it comes to any sort of wire transfer fraud issue. What do you got to do first? Call your bank, start a complaint. But the second thing is, either give us a call. So by the way, just so you got, it is 24/7. You know, all of them through all the insurance companies, it's 24/7. So you can call. I've been on a phone call 4th of July weekend on a Saturday night at 3 o'clock in the morning, because time is of the essence when these things occur. But with wire transfer fraud in particular, they are able now, the FBI, but Secret Service in particular, has been more successful in clawing back those funds to the point where now they've come out with statistics showing about 60% of the time, in about the first 24 to 48 hours, are able to claw back those funds. That is something they never were to do in the past. So you call, and then the Secret Service will also lead and put pressure on the banks. So don't hesitate to reach out, because that's where you can try to start getting this, you know, if it went out the door, it went out the door, right? And some of these threat actors will sometimes leave it there for even longer. You never know, but just call, don't hesitate.
We've seen the same thing. So we manage all of the claims for our clients, and the results are, if you call the bank within 24 hours of that event, you have much more likelihood of getting those funds back. So do not wait, do not panic, do not wait, jump and attack right away.
The other thing I want to say is we in Ag need to realize, and I say we in Ag because that's what we do and we are there. We need to realize that we are computer dependent, right? Think about every part of your life has been changed by technology, right? You use maps, you book airline flights, my daughters date through technology now, right? Everything has changed. Your company cannot survive without computers and technology, and it will not be as efficient. Most companies cannot go back to paper, and you're just putting too much risk on it. Acknowledging that and then putting the effort in to protect that is critical, and that's probably the biggest thing, I think.
Greg, you made reference to having an established policy for dealing with these inquiries. So as a group, thinking about your practice, what is the kind of preventative structure or rehearsal that you'll do with your clients so that when there's a phishing attempt or when there's an actual breach, that they know what they're supposed to do and how to plan?
So for me, what we do with our clients is we set up systems where you can click on an email and say, it looks like a phishing attack. It automatically gets sent, AI looks at it, determines is it safe or not. If it comes back, then you know it's relatively good. If it doesn't, what it then does is it goes out and pulls it from everybody else's inbox. So that's kind of our number one defense against those phishing type of attacks. There are many other things that we do to prevent before that, but ultimately it comes down to just HR policies and AP policies of pick up the phone, call the known number, and confirm, and just do it.
So a lot of the times when we talk to a lot of companies, we go through what's called like an incident response plan. Now, how many of you guys have an incident response plan or know what it is? Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah.
So, and the reason why I say that is because I will tell you, 99% of the time I ask that, everybody looks at me like, you got to be kidding me, Carol, right? So really, if there's another huge takeaway to take away from today, just know what number to call. And why do you need to know that? Because you will speak to somebody like Jennifer. Now, you can either have your broker's phone number. I look at, when it comes to brokers, they're your advocate when it comes to coverage. They should be the ones who are going to be sitting in your corner, advocating for you for whatever you need on the coverage end, right? I'm your advocate for everything else, right? So just so you know, I don't work for the insurance company. So whenever you do call your insurance company, whoever you speak to in terms of a lawyer, they don't work for insurance. I work directly for you. So the engagement is directly with you. I just keep the insurance company apprised on a high level as to what you guys are experiencing and seek their approvals as you're going through the process. But other than that, really, I'm here to protect you and to do everything I can to avoid those wonderful class action lawsuits that unfortunately I have to deal with day in and day out. But really, having that practice and just knowing that 1-800 number, that 24/7 hotline number, take advantage of and ask your brokers about what are the proactive services that my insurance company offers. Because a lot of them, you guys are paying good money for them. And a lot of them offer what's called tabletop exercises, or these mock exercises of let's practice an event. I will tell you, I probably do on average 2 to 3 calls a week, probably even more than that now, where we do what's called Meet the Breach Coach calls. And they're at no cost to you. At what I like to call the Wizard of Oz conversations, which are have an understanding what's offered, what the process looks like, and what do I have to do in the event of something happening? Not only just to myself, but what about if a third party goes down? What do I need to know? What are my obligations? One of the most important things that Greg was just talking about is personal identifiable information, but also what are your company's major keys that are, sometimes it's not just about your employees' information, but thinking about from an industry perspective, what's your intellectual property? We're seeing now a big uptick in weaponization of data, meaning that it used to be where they would just, try to get you, steal your, and try to get you, steal money from you, right? Now they're starting to look at the data. They will take a look at your insurance policy. Please do not name your declaration page in your system, because they will look at it and say,
Cyber insurance.
I know, they're like, oh, $5 million, I know you have that policy. There you go.
Right.
But think about what's the most important to you and what is worth the most to you, and have those conversations early. Do those tabletop exercises. Call one of the breach coaches that are on that panel. Because what is a breach coach? I'll let people say that. I don't know what that is. So basically, we are the coordinator of services. I would be here to advise you as to any sort of state and federal and contractual obligations that you would have. I bring up contractual obligations because that is probably one of the largest things that we're seeing now. Going beyond state and federal law, what are your obligations to anybody else in the event of something happening? But also just communications. I always say to everybody, step away from your email once an incident happens, because let me work on the communications going out the door. Let me help you, because this is all I do day in and day out. We handle about 4,000 of these a year. So anything that I can do to help you, I'm going to take off of your plate and put onto mine. Also, communications with media, communications with attorney generals, regulators, but also what about other vendors? You bring up a very important issue, Greg. Thinking about the more, and Jennifer, you mentioned this as well, think about what you have to rely upon, who else you need to rely upon in your chain. You can't be down for 25 days. You can't be down for a day. What does that mean to you? What is the process to get back up and running? But those mock incidences and that incident response plan, who to call. Also, we coordinate services with forensics teams in the event that you need credit monitoring, all of that. They're at previously vetted, pre-negotiated rates. Take advantage of it. Because a lot of people just don't know, right?
Yeah. So from the insurance perspective, just taking a step back, part of what our process is once you bind coverage, we're going to identify under that policy who are your panel firms. And Mullen Coughlin is on just about every single carrier's panel firm. What we do is we will pick the top 3 from that list, and we will say, hey client, here are the top 3 panel breach firms. We'll set up, we set up, you need a term, so yeah, so we set up an interview for our clients in those breach firms, so the clients can get a feel for which firm they want to use, and once they make that decision, we come up with a one-pager of the carrier hotline number, our contact information, and the panel firm's contact information, so that you know exactly who to call and what to do in the event of a breach. And you can call us. As Carolyn said, we are taking calls evenings, weekends, holidays, because that's when the breaches typically happen. And we will walk you through every step of the way. But as Carolyn mentioned, our role is to make sure that your policy is responding as we negotiated. So I would recommend having an interview with the breach firms in advance and knowing who you have a comfort level with. Also, they can do the conflict check in advance. So when the event happens, they're not scrambling going, oh wait, no, there's conflict, we can't represent you. All of that is already locked and loaded, ready to go in the event of a breach.
Oh, and by the way, even that conflict check that would be run, we're mandated, even if you don't have a pre-panel or whatever, that conflict check, we're actually mandated to and required to do it in less than an hour. Usually I'll tell you it's less than half an hour, but we will get on the phone with you in less than an hour, because knowing that time is going and you guys need answers.
One other thing that should be part of your kind of breach response plan is knowing whether or not your company wants to pay a ransom. Do you want to rely on backups and risk the data being sold on the dark web, or do you want to pay the money and still risk your data being sold on? There's no right answer. I think you guys will agree there's no real right answer, but you want to know what your company's position is going to be in advance, so you're not wasting time speaking with all the stakeholders of what's our stance on this? Are we going to pay the ransom? Are we not going to pay it? Because that's what happened with our client while they were struggling, trying to figure out whether they wanted to pay the extortion. That's when their customers started getting calls by the threat actors. So just don't waste time. When it happens, know what you're going to do in advance.
The to pay or not to pay discussion, right?
Well, no, I think, so for me, it's an easy, you don't want to pay.
Yeah.
They're criminals, they're North Korea, great nuclear weapons,
I'm with you.
They're bad people.
Yeah.
But to not pay, you have to prepare. You have to be ready for it, right?
100%.
And so it's not and I've been involved in one company that hadn't paid. We were brought into it, and they didn't have backups and stuff. They had to pay, and it fell through. You don't want to be there.
Well, and the problem with and I agree with you, having the discussion and having the stakeholders in the room about the to pay or not to pay discussion, it is very